So this is our ornament for the monk, and we have here a church because he is religious, and we also made a horse because he has his own horse and he loves riding. And then we have the bell here because they hear bells when he comes riding into town. And then we have the three words here. We have religious, we have bald, and we have hunting because he loves to hunt. And then the actual ornament is red because it is said that like his face is really red and his eyes were very red.
We read the monk's tale. He starts off with Lucifer, who is one of the highest up angels, and then he sins and he's turned into Satan. And next goes to Adam, and he was the ruler of paradise, but then he eats from the forbidden tree, and he's taken from that position. Then is Samson, and he was a strong man, but his strength was in his hair, and his wife ends up shaving his head and telling his enemies, and his enemies take out his eyeballs and lock him up in prison. And the moral of that story is that men should not tell their wives their secrets. Next is Hercules, and he was another strong man, and he was able to capture a lot of countries and defeat a lot of beasts, but he falls in love with a woman named Dianora who poisons him by putting poison in his shirt, which makes his skin fall off his bones. And instead of dying from the poison, he decides to die by lying on hot coals. And then next is King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the ruler of Jerusalem, and he was very sinful, very prideful, and God turned him into a beast. And then at the end, he promises to not sin again, and God turns him back into a human. Next is his son, Balthazar, and he was also a very prideful person, and his kingdom was divided up, and he was later killed. Next is Queen Zenobia, and she was the queen of Palmyra, and she would go out and kill beasts and fight with men. She wasn't afraid to go out in the woods and stuff. And she conquered many kingdoms with her husband, and then her husband died, and she was overthrown and humiliated by Alurian. And the next few stories tell about betrayal, and there was Pedro, who was the king of Spain, and he was killed by his brother, and Peter, who was the king of Cyprus, who was killed by his lords because they were jealous of him. Next was the Bernardo of Lombardy, and he was killed and imprisoned by his nephew and son-in-law. Next was Ogliano, and he was imprisoned with his children by the bishop, and they were left in prison to starve to death, and they did end up starving to death. And then next was Nero, and he killed people for fun, and then his people killed him. And then was Holofernes, and he was beheaded by a woman named Judith. And then was Antiochus, and he planned to destroy Jerusalem, but God inflicted him with a wound so he couldn't, and he ended up dying alone. And then next to Alexander, and he was poisoned by his people. And then Julius Caesar, who was betrayed by his friends Brutus and Cassius. And next to Croesus, and he was supposed to be burned to death, but the rain stopped the flames, and he thought he couldn't die, and then he was hung.